Just remove the partition so the sisters can see. Open the door as well. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Respected elders, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone, and Jazakumullah khairah for joining us on this Wednesday evening. And I want to welcome everyone who's here in person and also those who are joining us online as well. The live stream is active, and for all of those who are online, if you are watching from the YouTube page or the Facebook page, then inshallah you can comment and I will be able to see your comments as well, inshallah. So I want to start off by acknowledging the fact that first of all, of course, being made parents by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a great blessing of Allah Azza wa Jal, and that is something that we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. And we should always remember to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of having a child. It is actually amazing, subhanallah. You know, sometimes you will see people who are not blessed with children and they are making dua and they're making efforts and they're getting treatment and so much effort is going into, and the most greatest thing that they want is to be blessed with children. And then subhanallah, people who have children, alhamdulillah, and then what happens? You know, of course, inevitably at some point there are some struggles, there are some challenges, and then that becomes a source of tension and a source of making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does this tell us? It tells us that no matter what situation we are in, no matter how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us or blesses us, at some point we're always going to have some, reason to motivate us to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turn to Him. Either we are thanking Him or we are asking Him for some sort of relief because there is some sort of struggle or challenge. And this is the nature of the dunya, right? This is the nature of the life of this world, because it is not Jannah, it is not going to be Jannah. And the people that we deal with, including our own children, are going to be human beings. Of course, they're not angels, and we are not angels. So there is always going to be room for some sort of tension, some sort of stress, some sort of challenges, some sort of struggle. This is the name of the game, okay? So at every stage, when it comes to parenting as well, there are going to be their own challenges, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. And like with any struggle and any challenge, first and foremost, we should turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance and for support, right? So I'm saying this because I know, subhanallah, there will be parents who are either here or who are tuning in, who are really going through struggles, right? Who are really facing challenges that they might feel are insurmountable challenges that have no, challenges in which they're not able to see any avenue for relief or any way out of, right? So in every situation, I'd like to encourage everyone and say that do turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sincerity, and always be hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because indeed Allah Azza wa Jal can turn situations around instantly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change hearts. And indeed we have many examples where people were struggling, and they were struggling with their children, but it turns out that it was a phase, right? It was a phase that the child was going through. It was a particular struggle that the child was going through due to various factors. And alhamdulillah, once they came out of that and they were able to pass through, then alhamdulillah, things stabilized, right? And the reality is, my brothers and sisters, that this age of teenagers, right, this age that we're talking about in particular, is a very volatile age, right? It is an age which is very unstable because, and of course we all have a lived experience because we all were teenagers at one point, but especially in today's time. So when you take that mix of the changes that a child naturally goes through during that period of life, and then mix in all the other factors, the environmental factors, the societal factors, and you put in all the different pressures and the different expectations and challenges with regards to identity and beliefs and values and career choices and the natural desire to have freedom and to gain independence, and then the struggle that comes with parental controls. Like, all of that is a lot to handle, right, for a person who is not fully developed yet as an adult. So it is, so let's recognize that it is a very challenging time. And our children, again, because of the fact that they're not fully developed as adults, are not best trained or best, like in the best position to be able to deal with those challenges. And thus, we see the way that it comes out sometimes, right? And it doesn't come out in the best of ways. So let's talk about that, inshallah. Now, before we continue, I want to say that, yes, there is a lecture that I can give to children. Actually, I'm going to talk about that, and we probably shouldn't be lecturing them too much because it doesn't really work. But there are things that I should talk to or remind, my young friends who are teenagers, your children, mashallah, who every single one of them that I love, and I make dua for them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to protect them and guide them. There are certain things that I can remind them about, of course, with regards to, respect for parents and good character and all of those things, of course, which are very important. And I do that on occasion whenever, I have the opportunity. But tonight, inshallah, let's focus on what we as parents can do. Okay, so yes, our children are part of the equation, and there's certain, things that they should be doing and they should be taking care of and all of that. But today, that's not our focus. Tonight, that is not our focus. Tonight, our focus is what can we do? Okay, and how can we train ourselves to better deal with our teenage children? And even if our children are not yet teenagers, what can we do to help to ensure that this period of life that comes in, which is going to come with its own turbulence and challenges, goes through as smoothly as possible, inshallah. Okay, so as always, we want to try to turn to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam first and foremost, to try to see what we can pick up and what we find when we do a scan of the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and one of the things that really, subhanallah, stands out. There's a few things that stand out, but first of all is the approach that the Quran, or the approach of the people that the Quran has quoted, speaking to their children. Okay, now a lot of times, we're not going to get the exact age in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not told us, for example, the son of Luqman the wise was this age, or that Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam was this age. So we don't have that specifically in the Quran. However, when we look at the books of tafsir, do a little bit of research, we can get a sense as to what the likely age was. So for example, when we look at the instance of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam approaching his son Ismail alayhi salam with the dream that he had seen. Okay, so Ibrahim alayhi salam sees the dream that is commanding him, right? Because he was a prophet, not for us, so our dreams are not commands, so don't start acting up upon them. But because he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the dream tells him to do something which is pretty substantial, and that is to attempt to sacrifice his son. Okay, now you imagine how challenging that would be. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, what we learn is, subhanallah, like his approach is so beautiful, right? Where he says that, first of all, the manner of addressing, right? And it's not only in Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. We see this in the story of Luqman the wise. We see this in other prophets and their communication also with the children is how they speak. Ya bunayya, right? Oh my son, right? Oh my dear son. So it is a nice approach. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, he asks Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam what he thinks. He doesn't tell him that it is a command. Of course, he had no choice. He had to act upon it. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam did not have a choice that he could choose to act upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told him to do and or maybe he could not do it or do something else. No, right? Like the whole point of the story and part of the reason why we celebrate the sacrifice of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam on Eid al-Adha and we replicate it is because of the fact that he didn't ask any questions. But still, so even though he was determined on carrying out the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he didn't just go and start doing it, right? But rather he approached his son, who by the way, he loved very much. And some of the commentators of the Quran, some of the Mufassirun say that maybe his age was around 13, so potentially he was a teenager, right? Maybe a young teenager or a tween or preteen. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam asks him, Ya bunayya, inni ara fil manami anni adbahuk, fanzur madha tara. I have seen this dream where I have seen that I am sacrificing you. What do you think about this? Share with me, what is your opinion? What do you think about this? What do you say about this? So you see, that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam in his wise parenting, he's not telling his son what to do, even though it is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather he is asking his opinion, right? So that is the first thing that we learn about the approach. That if you want your teenager, if you want your child to do something, it is a good idea to first address them kindly, number one. And secondly, ask them their opinion. This is what is said. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. This is the command of Allah, or this is what I've read. What do you think about this? What should we do about this? So that's the first thing that we learn. The second thing, my brothers and sisters, is when Luqman al-Hakim, Luqman the wise, is giving the advice to his son, and there's a lot of important things that he's addressing, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has quoted that in the surah that is named after him in the Quran. It's not like the entire surah or like the entire juz is not about his advice. Okay, it's literally like a page. Okay, it's just a few verses where he touches upon some very, very important matters, starting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. Right? So building love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, building a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is first. And then a lot of things after that follow naturally, right? But if that initial relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is lacking and it's not there, then the rest of the things are actually going to become very difficult. But my point here is to say that it was very concise and very short. And actually the experts also say that do not lecture your teens. What do they say? Do not lecture your teens because it actually doesn't work. Okay, the moment they feel that you're lecturing them, this is a lecture, it's like the off switch goes on or the off switch goes off, the switch goes off, okay? And khalas, it's a lecture, okay, I'm being lectured and they're tuned out, right? So lecturing is, we have a tendency to do that when it comes to our children especially, but it seldom works, right? It's a lot better to be clear, to give a thought, plant a seed, and let that seed sprout. It's a lot better to plant a seed, give a thought, give a clear instruction, and let it set and let it sprout, as opposed to going into a very long-winded lecture, which they're going to tune out, right? So this is one of the things that we learn from the story of Sayyidina Luqman. When it comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, one of the things that we notice is that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam had no emotional outbursts. You'll be hard pressed to find any narration, any hadith that talks about the Prophet ﷺ having an emotional outburst. It didn't happen because he ﷺ had ultimate control over his emotions and had ultimate self-regulation in terms of channeling emotions, because of course, right, the best of creation ﷺ, so he had that perfected. Right? And of course, we are not going to be at the same level, we understand. But the lesson for us is really to control our emotions, because when we become emotional with our children, especially our teenagers, and what I mean by emotional is not like showing love and like positive emotions, but what I mean is, having outbursts and getting into shouting matches and that type of situation, it actually doesn't help us. And we actually, like, the moment you become emotional with your teenager is when you've lost your plot. You've lost the plot when you become emotional with your teenager, right? So do not fall for that. Do not go there, because once you show your vulnerability by being emotional, you've brought yourself down to the same level as a child. Because yes, they are, young adults or soon to be adults, but still they're children. They're still developing. So you've brought yourself down, and you've not only lowered the respect that they should have, the image that they should have of you, but you've actually given them, from a psychological point of view, you've actually given them bargaining power, right? You've showed your vulnerability, and you're showing to them that this is how they can get you frustrated. This is how they can get you, you know, uh, basically how they can get you to express your weakness, and it goes downhill from there. Okay, so emotions is something that we need to control as much as possible. I know it's hard as parents, okay, because sometimes our children will shock us. They will do things or say things maybe that we do not expect, or we will find out at school or from someone that they have done something that is very disappointing to us. But believe me, if we regulate our behavior at that point and just control ourselves and not react, it will help us in many, many ways, right? Because that way we're able to maintain the upper hand. And what do I mean by the upper hand? We, at the end of the day, are supposed to be the mature adults, right? Because we are the parents, and we are the ones who are supposed to be modeling behavior for our children. We are the ones who are supposed to be modeling behavior for our children. So our children are actually, even from a young age, are actually learning from how we interact with one another, how we respond to one another, how we respond to challenges and to disappointments and frustrations and stress and all of those things. So they're picking things up from us, right? So our job is to model the best behavior. And of course, we're human beings, we're not angels. So we may have a few, weak points here and there, right? We're gonna, maybe trip up here and there. That's natural, right? You don't need to like beat yourself up over that, but you want to try to maintain composure as much as possible, because you are dealing with an individual, a child, who is still developing, right? And that's the other thing also to remember, because when it comes to the child's brain, a teenager's brain, right, their prefrontal cortex has not fully developed yet. This is the part of the brain that has to do with judgment. Okay, so because it is not fully developed yet, and their judgment is not fully sound yet, they tend to be more emotional, more reactive, and a bit more poor in judgment. Now, not passing judgment, maybe some will be a little bit more, better than others. But generally, this is why, and research shows this is why we find teenagers engaging in risky behavior. Right? Why do you see teenagers driving generally more crazily than adults? Right? Engaging in, substances that are more harmful that adults know not to. Even some adults now they do, but generally we find that teens are more prone to risky behavior. Right? This is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not fully developed their brain yet, and it is still a work in progress, and will probably get there by the age of in the 20s, right? Maybe mid 20s. Okay. So you have to keep that in mind, that yes, they will be emotional at times. They will make bad choices at times. They will not be able to see everything logically. Right? They will be emotional and will go for the things that feel good and that that they want to do, as opposed to understanding the risk. And if you try to talk to them, right, it's good to try to talk to them as an adult or as someone who's responsible. But if you expect that in return from them and then get disappointed when they don't live up to that, that's a recipe for frustration, right? So our expectations need to be clear that yes, we are dealing with our children who we love. They are not the same as when they were 5 years old or 7 years old or 9 years old or even 10 years old or even 11. They are changing, and as they grow, they are developing their independence. Right? This is from the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them. Right? They need independence. How are they otherwise going to become an adult? Right? How are they going to become responsible and mature if they don't get independence? Right? So they need to be given independence, and the reason why these struggles and tensions sometimes happen is because they are pushing for independence, and they're looking for that, and maybe sometimes we as parents are not ready to give it to them, right? So that is why those struggles can sometimes happen. Now, when they are going through that phase and children are not responding in the way they used to, okay, this is very typical behavior, by the way, for teenagers. Okay, so when they're young and they're children, they're very expressive. They'll come and they'll hug you, they'll kiss you, they'll talk to you, they'll do all of those things. But you notice as they start growing older, they start drifting away a little bit. Okay, maybe they're not as expressive anymore. Maybe they're not responding in the same way. Maybe they don't want to talk to you anymore. Okay, that's natural. Okay, that's normal and that's natural. Now, if they've completely cut themselves off and they're locked in their room like 20 hours a day or something, okay, then maybe there's a reason to be concerned. But if they generally are not just talking as much, and they are not expressing themselves in the same way, it's nothing to panic about. Okay, this is simply a natural course of development, and our children developing their own independence. So one of the things I want to highlight, my brothers and sisters, is that when we think about our children, right, it is important, like especially the teenagers, let us let's remind ourselves that our children are not our opponents or our competition. Because sometimes we end up, because of these little things, and they might actually be little, but as parents, we want respect. Oh, why did you look at me like this? Huh? Why did you roll your eyes? Huh? I said something and you went like this. Oh, okay, you went like this. Okay, whatever, right? His eyeball went like this. Big whoop. Okay, big deal. Okay, it's not necessarily intended with disrespect, but that is their way of coping with the situation. Okay, so what I say to you is, okay, if you go like this is probably better than saying something to you. Okay, sometimes you say, why are you not saying anything? Why are you not saying anything? Well, the child is actually self-restraining themselves and not engaging because they're probably going to end up saying something bad, or like they're going to end up disrespecting you or being perceived as being disrespectful, so they're not saying anything. So that's good. So let them be. Say, okay, alhamdulillah, you don't want to talk, that's fine. Whenever you're ready, we can talk. Yeah. So so just remember, my point was that our we start thinking as teenagers as an adversary. Okay, my child is always disrespecting me. I had parents like that who came to me. Ram Saab, he's just always just comes in, he's angry, and he's just like not talking to his mother properly, and just disrespectful, rude. And the kid's a good kid, mashallah. He's coming to the masjid, he's everything. But turns out, okay, he was going through a very stressful time in terms of his studies. There's a lot to do, there's a lot of pressure, and yeah, maybe he wasn't the best at coping with that pressure. I'm not saying that disrespect is a good thing. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is try to have a little bit of understanding and give everything its due importance, right? Not everything is a hill. Oh, one of my professors would say, you have to pick the hill that you want to die for, right? You have to be selective about which issue is actually worth making an issue out of, right? And like actually taking it seriously, and which ones you can just let go a little bit. Just keep it, monitor it at the back of your mind. Say, okay, yes, I've noticed these things. Let's see if it develops further. Is it something which is one-off? Does it happen all the time? Does it not? Okay, you know what? I'm not going to be too strict on these little minor things, because this is probably a reaction to what my child is going through. So point is, remember that your child is not your opponent. Okay, you're not dealing with an enemy. You're not dealing with an adversary, but rather, we are on the same team. Okay, we love them, we care for them, and they also love us and care for us as well, even though they may not express it. Even though they may not express it. And this is true, by the way, for children and also for students as well, right? The way I realized this, when I was in Kingston, there was a young boy who would come for the evening classes, weekend classes, and he was a handful, and he was a troublemaker. And I was much younger at that time as well, so I was a little bit more energetic, a little bit more emotional. All the things that I'm saying you shouldn't do now, I'm saying from experience, right? So back then I would do it too. So I would get into shouting and just yelling at him. He would really get the best of me, right? So, anyways, troublemaker. SubhanAllah, when I was leaving, when I announced to the masjid that I told him I'm leaving, I'm moving to Canada, that was the one kid who was crying in the class that I was leaving. Nobody else cried. He was the one student who cried. So what I'm trying to say is that children do care and they do love, right? Even teenagers, but maybe they don't express it. at that point, at that time, right? They're not the best at expressing it, and they feel a little bit, maybe unsure, or feel a little bit shy about expressing, love. But in most cases, in like 99% of the case, they do love you and they do care for you. Okay, so just remember that you're on the same team. And when there's a situation, instead of thinking of a situation as, okay, how do I attack this situation, let's think about how do we approach it as mature helpers. So instead of thinking that my child is doing this against me, and now I have to go and I have to fight with them and set them straight, say, okay, this is the situation that they're in. I'm a mature parent. What can I do to try to help them move from this situation? Okay. So that's an important point that I want us to remember, inshallah. Um, in that process of becoming independent, children will make mistakes. You cannot, as a parent, protect your child from making mistakes. Okay, they need to make mistakes in order to learn. There's that term helicopter parenting, right? If you are constantly hovering over your child, constantly try to protect them from making the wrong choices, they will not learn how to make good choices. Okay. Now, of course, does that mean that we, leave them totally and not care about them? No, right? I'm not saying that you should leave them and not care about them at all, but they need to have the space to learn from their mistakes, because naturally you're not always going to be there. As parents, we're not always going to be there, to manage them, and they're going to have to learn. And at some point, they're going to have to learn from their mistakes. Yes, why some like if someone is telling you, you're trying to learn something, okay, and I'll give you an example of driving. I love giving driving examples like this because I like driving. But if a person goes to another location, they drive, and there's always someone who is guiding them on where to turn. Okay, they're always dependent on their GPS, or there's a person who's always telling them, okay, turn here, turn there, turn there. Those directions are actually, in most cases, not registering, right? Because they're just used to following directions. And if they actually go alone, even though they've gone through that road so many times, right? But now the directions are not there, or that person is not there to help them, there's a good chance they're going to struggle because they've actually haven't learned to do it by themselves. Okay. So in the same way, our children also have to learn how to do things. And sometimes they will make mistakes. Sometimes, yes, they will miss deadlines for homework. Sometimes, they will, I don't know, get a bad mark at an exam or fail a course or something. But that's how they're going to learn, right? Because if they're constantly, you're always after them and you're always pushing them, then they're not going to get an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, right? So yes, it's important to offer guidance. Yes, it's important to have an overall look to say, okay, where are they sort of going wrong? What are the risks? Communicate it once clearly, and that's it. You leave it to them. You don't need to nag and constantly remind your child. Okay, maybe you need to give a few reminders, occasional, okay, calmly, nicely, but then let them own their mistakes and own the consequences of their actions, right? And I know it's hard, and sometimes the matter is very serious, right? I understand. Sometimes they may be really going into risky behavior. But the point is, you will never, as parents, we will never be able to force our children to do anything, especially teens. Okay? We're not going to be able to force them anyways. Okay? So we say, okay, what is the best way to get them to get to the best outcome? So my next point is to say that let us think about the outcome we want. And actually, this is a little strategy that I use for many things, right? And actually, you can use it for parenting as well. That is, instead of thinking, oh, I have a situation, what should I do about it? Think about what is the outcome you want. Okay, so forget about dealing with the situation right now. Say, what outcome do I want? What do I want for my child or out of the situation? Okay. Then you reverse engineer it and you say, okay, what are the things I need to do in order to get to that outcome? As opposed to simply looking at a situation and saying, okay, I don't know what to do. Should I do it? Let me try this. Let me try that. No. Think about what outcome you want and then work backwards and say, okay, if I choose this action, if I say this to my child, is it likely to get them towards the outcome or not? If I behave in this way with my child, what is their likely response? Is it going to help them get closer, or is it going to help them get away? And right, and this is the same approach I apply to many different things. So for example, obviously a lot of discussion happening about issues that we're facing currently. So again, That's what my approach is. Say, okay, what is the outcome that we want and we can reasonably expect? What are the things we can do to get to that outcome, right? So it's an approach that if you apply to parenting as well, if you apply to parenting, it actually helps in many ways as well. One of the things I want to mention is with regards to questioning. Mhm. A lot of times we want to know, and it's good that we want to know what our children are doing, and we should be involved in their lives to a certain extent, and we should know what is happening. But again, there's a psychology behind it. Okay, a lot of parents I find get really, really inquisitive and just nag their children. And when you nag your children and you keep asking your teenager, what happened? What is this? Okay, tell me about this. Tell me about that. Who's this? It doesn't help. It has the opposite effect. They close up. They climb up. And again, we turn to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu said, and this is famous, we discussed it previously as well. I think every lecture on parenting, this hadith comes up, says that I served the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 10 years. Ashara sinin. I served him for 10 years. He says, he did not ever say to me, uff, meaning he never expressed, annoyance with me or to me. And he never said to me harshly, or he never said that lima sana'ata wala alla sana'ata, that why did you do that or why did you not do that? See, the Prophet ﷺ didn't probe and say why this, why that. He didn't go into whys, right? Because children at that age, again, the logic part is a little weak. So there's probably not a good answer. Maybe they do have an answer, okay? But let's not go into whys. Okay, let's just talk about, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. This is what the guidance is. Okay, you didn't do it. Inshallah, next time. Now, of course, if it keeps happening and it's the child is getting older and it is something which is perhaps being done purposely, then yes, perhaps you do want to ask and say, okay, so can you explain to me the reason? What is it? I'm curious to know. What's your thought process behind this? Why are you making this choice? But you can have that conversation, right? But point is, don't ask too many questions. Teenagers will say, and I read about this, is that there's way too much noise in their lives. There's too much noise in their lives. They go to school, there's noise, there's noise everywhere, right? There's noise. They just want some peace. And as soon as they come home, if we start asking a lot of questions, it doesn't help, right? And rather, it's reverse psychology that actually ends up working better in many instances, where if you don't say anything, right? And by the way, they're expecting you to ask, and you don't ask, then it's, okay, there's something different. And then they feel comfortable enough when they want to start sharing things, right? So being a good listener is a very important part of being a good parent, especially to a teenager, right? If you're curious about what is happening, maybe the best thing you can do is just sit back and listen, right? Because they're more likely to talk if you actually don't pressure them to share information. And I've seen cases where people have been very pressureful, have constantly been nagging and asking their children, and it can end up, I don't want to say very badly, but it can have consequences to the point where the children even don't want to be at home. They don't want to be at home because they're constantly being badgered and constantly being asked about stuff. Okay, so it's not a good strategy if you want to have good communication with your teenager, right? Another strategy you can use is that you actually share something from your own life, from your own day. You share something, it's a story, right? Or you want to get an opinion on something. And by the way, this is another strategy. With that strategy, sometimes asking an opinion doesn't have to be about something which is very serious. Meaning, whether they choose A or B or C won't really matter, okay? But by simply asking, you show importance, okay? And you show that you are willing to listen, and you show that their opinion is valued and it is important, right? So, share something from yourself, and if they don't want to share, that's okay. That's okay, that's fine. Eventually, inshallah, they'll come around and they will open up, or they'll give you a little tidbit. They'll give you a little something, and then you can ask a little bit, not too inquisitive, right? Because one of the things that also gets teenagers to not share is the fear of getting an overreaction. Okay? Two things: either an overreaction or worrying their parents. They don't want to worry their parents, so they just won't tell you stuff because they don't want you to be worried. Okay, and that's where the emotion part again, the emotional regulation comes in. So if even if you are worried, you don't want to express it. Right? You always want to be calm. Oh, okay, that happened. Okay, all right. Just play it cool. Just calm, cool, and control is how you want to play it. Right? So either it's because it's too much worry, or they're worried about the reaction that's going to come. Okay, so just want to be chill about things. Oh, okay, yeah. You could talk about other people or like other situations that have happened. Oh yeah, that happened. Okay, yeah, that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. You know. So then they realize, okay, well, I thought that my parent was going to be super upset about this, or they were going to react, but apparently they seem to be pretty chill about it. So okay, now I feel confident that I can actually share things, and they're not going to react. And you can actually say this openly, right? You can say openly, look, my dear son, my dear daughter, I love you and I care for you. And during life, there may be times when you make some bad choices, and you fear the consequences, or you feel that you've messed up. If ever that happens, you can come to me, and I promise I'm not going to overreact. I promise I'm not going to overreact or get upset. You can come to me and share with me, and I will try my best to help you. Okay. If you can build that type of confidence, that's like the ultimate. Okay. That's going to be hard for many parents, for most parents. But if you can build that type of relationship with your child where they feel safe to come to you and to share things, and they know that you're going to be able to help them and not judge them and not, have a reaction, then you're in a much better place in terms of being able to hear things from them, right? Judging is also, a big part of it. If they feel that they're going to share something with you, and you're going to say, "Oh, that was so dumb. Why did you do that? That was such a stupid thing to do. Why in the world would you do that? What was wrong with you?" The next time they're not going to share things with you. Okay, so just again, calm, cool, collected, and that doesn't mean that you're indifferent to what is happening. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we're even other issues. Again, same things apply. It doesn't mean that we don't care or that we're indifferent and that just we're ignoring it. We're not. It's registering. We're taking note of it, but we're going to deal with it strategically. We're not going to talk about it right then. We're going to find another opportunity to address it in a different way. So no judging, right? Because otherwise, they're not going to share. They're just going to close up. And then you're going to come to me, parents are going to come to me, my child's not talking to me. I don't know what's wrong. They're just always on their phone. They're this and that, right? So these are some of the ingredients that go into creating an environment where your child, especially your teenager, feels comfortable enough to come and share. Now, sometimes, the saying, you have to fake it till you make it. So sometimes, teenager will be in a situation that we don't really understand. We don't get it. Okay? We think it's really silly. Or we think we know the solution. Okay. But still, we're going to say, okay, I understand. No matter how difficult it may be, try to start every interaction, especially if it's a bit stressful, with saying, okay, I understand. Empathize. Yes, this must be really difficult for you, or you're stressed out about this. You have an exam, you have a project, you have whatever, you must be really tired. Okay, I empathize with you. Okay, I know that's really difficult. What you're going through is really difficult. It's just validation. It doesn't mean you necessarily agree with their choices, right? But it's just validating that whatever they're feeling, yes, you understand that they're in that moment where they feel this way, and you understand that and you recognize that, right? So in every situation, you say, okay, I understand. You want to start off with empathy, right? And then you can try to guide them and try to ask, okay, what is the best thing you can do in this situation? And perhaps they're in such an emotional state that whatever you say is not going to have any effect, and that's okay. If they're going to go and cry in their room for half an hour, let them go in their room and cry for half an hour. Okay, it's okay. You don't need to solve that situation. Okay, let them figure it out on their own. Of course, all of this comes with caveats. So if you're dealing with a serious, health issue or a serious mental health crisis or something, then obviously it's different. But I'm talking about day-to-day interactions. Right? Day-to-day interactions, you don't have to become so panicked and so worried that my child is crying, or my child is saying that they don't know how to deal with this. Let them figure it out. Let them figure it out. Okay, they're gonna submit the assignment late, so let them submit the assignment late. Okay, they're not well prepared for their exam and they're freaking out. Well, guess what? They were wasting time before on their phone and didn't study, so they're gonna learn the hard way, right? They're gonna flunk, one exam. They're gonna get a bad grade. They're gonna fail, and then that's how they're gonna learn. Next time, hopefully, they'll remember, right? So it's okay, and let them. And I'm repeating myself here, but basically, let them make their mistakes and don't get overly panicked and overly, worried when such things happen. Um, Praise is an important one. I really feel like we don't do that enough. So whenever children do something wrong, that becomes an issue. Huge discussion. Mom's involved, dad's involved, all the siblings are listening. Everyone's like, okay, why did this happen? Why that's huge drama around it, right? It's a spectacle, right? When the child does something good, say, oh, okay, good job, move on. So does that help build confidence? No, right? So actually, the better strategy is try to find every single little thing that you can find, even if it's really hard to find. That's good, because this is my philosophy, right? If we encourage the good, and actually, this is my dua as well, right? Whenever we're dealing with a situation where there's evil and there's hardship, right? Or you're making dua for people or for situations, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, Ya Allah, whatever good is in this person or in the situation, Allah increase it so much, grant so much barakah to the good that the bad gets wiped out automatically. Right? Give so much growth to the good that the bad goes away naturally. Right? جاء الحق وزهق الباطل. Right? They don't stay together. The truth and the falsehood, they don't stay together. Right? So similarly, the good and the bad, they don't. It's a zero sum game, right? Where one goes up, the other's gonna go down. Inshallah. Okay. So you want to encourage the good, right? Whatever little bit, even if you're able to find. Sometimes our children actually do big good things, but we don't really recognize it. We don't really celebrate it, right? So give them opportunities to feel good and to feel encouraged, and that they have made you happy. Because at the end of the day, they are looking for approval, even though they act like they're not. They are looking for approval, right? And this is why you'll see me say this to our young people who come to the masjid as well from time to time, right? For example, in Ramadan, we're having challenges with noise and things like that, whatever behavior, right? But we want to keep encouraging the good, right? Yes, we try to address what was problematic from time to time, but we don't want to forget the good, but rather we want to encourage that more, right? So when good is being encouraged and it's being recognized and it's being celebrated, then naturally, right, a person is more inclined towards doing good because they know that there is some sort of reward associated with it. There is approval associated with it. There is recognition associated with it. There is, good sentiments associated with it, right? And when the bad happens, okay, it happened. Let's talk about it. Let's deal with it. What can we do better next time? And let's try to move on, inshallah, right? And if you think about it, subhanAllah, this is the approach that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes with us. Right? The Prophet ﷺ told us that a person who intends to do good, who intends to do something good but doesn't do it, they get one hasana, they get one good deed. And if they actually are able to execute and do the good action they were thinking of, they actually get 10 good deeds. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards us more for doing good, but it's not the same for doing bad. Right? If somebody plans to do bad and then they stop and they don't do it, they still get a good deed. And if they actually go ahead and they end up doing the evil act, then they get only one bad deed. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stacked the system in our favor. And similarly, we should also try, especially when we're dealing with others, but particularly with our children, teenagers, try to stack the system in their favor. So what would that translate as? What would it mean? If they do something good, celebrate it 10 times. No, I don't mean 10 times literally, but make it a big deal. Okay? 10 times more than what it actually is. And if they do something bad, then keep it to what it is. Minimize it, keep it to what it is. If it's serious, then of course you want to take it seriously, you want to learn lessons from it. I'm not saying minimize it to the point where it's ignored, but don't blow it out of proportion. Don't blow it out of proportion. Use it as a teachable moment and move on from there, inshallah. Okay, so let's look at some typical interactions. Okay, typical interactions that. Okay, I have an idea. Why don't you tell me a typical interaction, and then we'll talk about how to deal with it. Okay, for those who are online, you can also comment, pose it as a question, or give me a scenario. Or the parents who are here, you can also share. It could be from anyone. It doesn't have to be from your child. It could be, simulated, just any scenario that you make up. A typical scenario with a teenager. Okay, very good. So time spent on devices. Okay, major complaint. Okay, so generally, how does it go? We have the child who wants a device, who wants to use a device, and we have a parent who feels like the child is spending too much time on the device. Okay, so naturally, you have tension there. Okay, so what would be a good approach to deal with this to start off with?
Actually, one day I was discussing that with my son.
Okay.
Just spending, like, I was telling him, Dad, when you come from school, you just wanna sit and watch TV or wanna play on, like, like PlayStation or whatever it is.
Yes.
His answer, and really until now I remember, we were sitting in the car. He said, Daddy, when you come from work, you wanna watch the news, you wanna watch TV, you wanna cool down. Same things. I wanna cool down when I come from school. And honestly, but I'm said, like, I still got angry from time to time when I see him, and I just, like, and my wife should do that. But still, just, what, keep a distance.
So the brother said a very good point. So he said,
Yeah, convince me. He has a point.
Yeah. So I'll repeat it for the people who are online that as son is always on the a device. So like when he comes from school, he's on his phone or watching TV, and that's okay. Well, why do you do that? So son gives a response that Dad, when you come home from work, you do the same thing, right? You want to chill, you want to relax, you want to take a break and watch TV. So it's really the same thing, right? So Jazakallah khair for sharing that. So I think it's important to have some guidelines, right? I'm not an advocate for having no guidelines whatsoever, but one of the things that we can do, inshallah, is involve our children in making the guidelines, right? And teachers will use this as well. At the beginning of the year, they'll actually ask the children and say, okay, what guidelines do you think? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to make the right guidelines, but at least you involve them in the process. Say, okay, tell me, what do you know about technology and about using phones, using devices? Yes, we feel like using it. I feel like using it as well. Maybe I use it too much, right? But what is it? What have you learned, or what do you know about it? So, if you're having a calm conversation, there's a good chance that they'll say that yes, it has some harms, or you can discuss, what are the harms, what are the benefits, and so on. So help them process that. Say, okay, so what do you think would be a good, how much time is reasonable on a device? You have 24 hours in a day. Obviously, you have to go to school, you have to eat, you have to use the bathroom, you have to pray, you have to change, you have to shower, you have to do all these things. So how much time do you think a person should spend on the device? Okay, and have that conversation, right? And maybe you're not going to agree on exactly how much, and then you can say, you know what, I think 7 hours, 5 hours, and by the way, you can even get an app, right, like I did, that, or it's like part of health. Yeah, it tracks screen time. So I'm actually a little ashamed to share mine. So
I shared my
yes, but not publicly in a lecture. Yes.
I shared my
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, okay, I work full time. I'm on the phone all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm sharing my screen time with you right now.
Yeah.
So you're just not doing that much. So just compare mine with yours.
Yeah.
And see what type of things I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about it.
Right. So you're having a discussion around it, right? So one of the best things we can do is when it comes to rules and regulations is really to engage the child. That's not to say you have to follow what the child says, but making them part of the process. And then you can say that, you know what, I really think that's a bit too much for you. So you know what, I'm going to set a timer, or I'm going to set controls on your device to say that it's going to shut off or whatever. It's going to, pause everything after 4 hours of screen time or 3 hours of screen, or whatever it is that you set. These are some restrictions I'm going to put in. And once I feel that, you've proven yourself and you're doing a good job and regulating it, then I have no problem in increasing it. So having a more collaborative approach, as opposed to enforcing, say, You're always on your phone. Why is it like, what's wrong with you? Don't you know you have to study too? What's wrong with, what's wrong with children these days? Okay, give me your phone. I'm going to take away your phone. Okay, that's not a healthy approach. That is not a healthy approach. So, at the end of the day, you have to remember you are the parent, so you can set limits. Okay, but as I've mentioned before, what I really believe in is first of all making it clear, and this comes back to talking as well. Having the opportunity to say, look, I am not interested in controlling you. I have no interest in controlling you. Okay, I want you to be as free as a bird to make your own decisions and your own choices, and I have no interest that I want to, constantly look after you and be after you. Okay, I don't want to do that. Okay, but my job as a parent is to train you enough, and when I feel when I feel confident and you gain my confidence, then I have no problem. I'll remove the restriction. I'll give you more. I'll give you more than what you want. Right? That's the other strategy, by the way. Right? So looking forward and thinking ahead as to what are the things your child will want, and give it to them before they ask, or bring it up before they ask. So now, all of a sudden, it takes them out of the driver's seat because they're like, oh wow, oh, my parent is actually pretty cool, right? Well, my mom or my dad is actually pretty progressive, right? And that they're actually thinking about what I want, and they're actually looking forward to, giving me choices and letting me do stuff. Okay, so I don't need to be worried about this. I don't need to be worried about it so much because I trust that they're actually thinking about this ahead of me. And, if I'm good, then inshallah, they will give it to me automatically, right? I don't need to fight for it. I don't need to ask for it, right? So that is another thing that we can use. Okay. Yes.
I think a lot of things to like activities, keeping the kids with activities.
Yes, keeping them engaged.
Busy.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Sports and things
Yeah.
like that.
Empty mind is the devil's workshop.
They go home and burned out.
Yeah. A lot of the problems will start when there's too much time. Okay, so we had a comment here. Another situation: girls gossiping about other girls at school. Okay, so this, I guess, it depends as to whether your child is the one who's being gossiped about or whether your child is the one who's engaged in the gossip, right? So the first thing, and I think sometimes we miss this, is that sometimes we ourselves, and I'm not saying this is the case particularly for everyone, but sometimes we are actually doing the things that we're telling our kids not to do. Okay, so we don't want them to behave in a certain way. We don't want them to gossip, for example, right, about others. But then at home, we're gossiping about others, right? So, it sends a conflicting message, right? And it really takes the wind out of your whole argument and your whole position, right? Like, I mean, and kids are like, teenagers especially are like, they can sniff hypocrisy like from a mile, okay? So, their radar for picking up hypocrisy is really, really strong, okay? So, and sometimes, yes, things will happen and we tell our kids not to do something and they're like, hey, Baba, Mama, Mom or Dad, you're doing the same thing. And then in those moments, you have to be honest with yourself and you have to say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't be doing this. Thank you for reminding me. That's good that you noticed and you reminded me. And when I notice something about you, I will also remind you, but you're right. I shouldn't be doing that. So modeling behavior, of course, is very important. But then on top of that, if you find that, that, for example, a child is engaged in this type of behavior where there's a lot of gossip and there's a lot of drama going on, then really helping them, and giving them coping strategies and say, okay, well, why is this happening? What are some of the things that, that are leading to this? And you may not be able to solve it, right? When you're not able to solve it, and you don't need to solve every problem, right? The key is to give the right messages. Say, okay, look, I understand that, girls get together and they want to talk and, you want to talk about others and, boys pick on others and, kids do these things. But our responsibility, our job should be that when we have that type of situation, we try not to participate in that, right? Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, not to gossip, not to backbite. It is harmful. It's harmful for us. It's harmful for the ones that we're talking about. And it is not the right thing to do, right? And we make that message clear and we leave it for a bit, right? You don't have to keep asking, okay, remember what I told you yesterday about gossiping? What happened today? Was there any gossip today? What did you do? What did you not do? Okay, we don't want to do that, okay? So this is what I mean by planting the seed and leaving it. Plant the seed and leave it. Plant a seed and leave it. And then let your child deal with it and cope with it. And you know what? Maybe they will continue to do that behavior, right? Maybe they won't stop, especially at school, because you can't control what is happening at school, right? But that's just something that you leave them with nice reminders here and there. and then eventually, inshallah, hopefully they'll grow out of it.
Just on the point of planting the seed,
Yes.
I wanted to comment earlier about that. It is much easier to plant the seed before the teenage years.
Yeah.
Because they're more accepting.
Of course.
So that's one of the strategies as well. Is to
Absolutely.
plant the seed then, and then try to have a discussion later. Remember when we talked about that?
Absolutely, 100%. So anything that you can do. So, okay, so if you want to prepare for teenage years, start before the teenage years come. Okay, and I can't emphasize this enough, right? The effort that you can put into nurturing your child and developing a positive relationship and instilling good values that you're able to do before they hit the teenage years, you will never be able to do that during the teenage years, hardly ever. Okay, so preparation is key. The more you can invest in terms of care, in terms of love, in terms of good values and good tarbiyah during their formative years, right? Which is their early years when they're still developing, and they're still developing when they're teens as well. But in the formative years, right, when they're in elementary school, especially, that is the time when you really want to put in your best effort. That is when the time, really the time when you really want to be there for them, when you really want to strengthen your bonds as much as possible, because that is going to pay off once they hit the teenage years. You can still have some turbulence, but it's really going to pay off then, right? So to your point, absolutely, planting the seeds, you want to do that, especially when they're young, but even when they're older, you still want to remind them. But what I mean by planting the seed is you don't need to go in and actually try to make it happen and force it to happen, right? Drop the reminders and then let it be, let it sink in and let it absorb and let them deal with it, inshallah. Um, Somebody said, okay, take away the device from them, cut the cable from the outside. Look, if it gets really bad, you can do that. Okay, if it gets really bad and you need to, and you need to put in some controls, you can absolutely turn off the internet, unplug the Wi-Fi, cut off the data on their devices, whatever. But these are all extreme measures. Ideally, you don't want to go down that route. Okay, ideally, you're able to control the situation and work something out before it gets to that point. But sometimes in some cases where it's really becoming too much, that may be something that you do, but you don't want to do that all the time, right? Because the more you end up doing something all the time, the more your teenagers are able to find ways around it, right? So you don't want to do that, right? You want to make it a rare occurrence, inshallah. Any other situations or questions online? If anyone has any questions as well, happy to answer those, inshallah.
So it's like you trying to do so much for them, they pick them up on time, whatever they're doing. But when you ask them to do something, it happens maybe 6 hours after.
So no reciprocity. Yes.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I did this man 3 times already today. And then one small thing.
Yes. So for those who are online, basically doing a lot for your child, but not getting the same type of, not seeing that reciprocated, essentially, right? Yes, it's true that happens from time to time, and part of it is cultural as well. I feel, so things which were expected culturally, right, during our time or in other lands, in other cultures. Yeah, children here maybe are not as proactive about those things. They don't take them as seriously, right? It's not that big of a deal for them. So I think a lot of that has to do with cultural norms and the feeling that, yeah, like our parents are doing it for us, and that's great. But I think perhaps some of our kids, maybe I'm just making this up. Sometimes I feel like our kids are thinking, okay, yes, they're doing this for me, and I'm gonna pay back once my parents get old. I don't need to pay back right now. So right now, I'm still a kid. I'm still sort of important, and they're my parents, and that's what parents are supposed to do. But then, eventually, they'll come around to paying back, but not immediately. So, but it's true. I mean, I think that's actually that's an excellent point, because I think that sometimes that is a point of contention, and it's true, but there's sometimes cultural misunderstanding and miscommunication there. Okay, so sometimes I've heard of parents and they're complaining about their kids, and they're like, I can't believe my child. Here I was working in the kitchen, doing this and that, and they never offered to come and help. And then the question is, okay, well, did you ask them for help? Like, no, they should know themselves, but they're not. Right? It's not gonna like that's not a thing that they're tuned for here, right? Unless we work really hard to instill that, they'll just be like, yeah, okay, everyone does their job. I did my job. I went to school, but that was my job. You know, Parents put me in all these activities and all these programs, whatever, right? Studying and all this stuff. So I did that. I need a break now. Okay. So now, mom's job, whatever, is to cook, or dad's job is to pick me up or whatever. Okay. So they're just doing their job. They're not really doing me any favors, right? They're actually, that's actually something that I've heard, right? From children, even grown-ups, like when they grew up, they said, well, okay, yes, our parents, they did a lot for us, but that was sort of expected, and now we're going to do it for our children. We're going to pass it forward, So there is this type of thinking. I think it's a fair point that there may be a sense of entitlement, and I think one of the ways we can discuss that, bring it up, is just first of all being clear, right? When it comes to communicating with teenagers, don't expect. Yes, set the expectations. Don't expect them to be able to read your mind or to be able to, really be like, right at the forefront of responding in the best way. You need to be clear about what you want. If you're not clear what you want, don't expect that you're going to get it. So, if you want them to do something, maybe even tell them beforehand, and they'll have their own reasons. They're like, yes, I'm tired, I'm busy, or maybe they're just too distracted, right? And that again goes back to their emotional state, right? So it's more emotional. They're busy playing a video game.
So basically, the strategy I've used is first set the expectations.
Yes.
And when that doesn't happen, do it for them. Tell them, I am doing it for this.
Hmm.
They really feel bad and they won't give you a chance again to do it.
Okay, so that's an interesting strategy.
It works.
So set expectations, and then make it clear. And if they don't do it, then you do it yourself, and tell them that I'm doing it for you. Yeah. Okay. I like that.
Another point on this is kind of empowering them. So telling them that I do need your help.
Yes.
So I can't do it anymore, or I'm busy with something, and you are able to help. You
Yes.
have the power. So give me some of that power.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
then
need it. Yeah.
we're a family, and we have each other's back.
Yeah.
So
So it's a team. It's a team approach. It's a team approach to say, look, I was doing this, but I'm not able to do this anymore. So can you come and help me out?
It works. And it works.
it does.
Hmm.
There's a related situation, but somewhat of a different take on it, which is expecting them to be a little more responsible. So not something that we expect them to do for us. But
Yes.
like their own academic work, studies, things that they need to do for themselves. Having that expectation, but them not meeting those expectations.
So expectations with regards to work and responsibility, right, towards your studies and so on, right?
The things is just, I think, just because like most of us actually came from different background. The kids, they grow up here, they were born here, we born somewhere else.
Yes.
So we're raised in a certain way, they are getting raised in a different way.
Yep.
Honestly, like the kids from school, like be yourself, do it in your own way. Don't
Yes.
stress out yourself. You feel at the end of the day, the kids really, they don't multitask anymore. They go in one directions. If any obstacle just stop on their way, they
Yeah.
don't really know how to do the U-turn and go around.
Yes.
And we expect them to do that, but because I feel sometimes, honestly, I expect my kids to do that, and sometimes that's kind of a little bit annoying. But when you think about it more, you think, okay, what's not their fault? It's probably kind of, this is unfortunate how the culture is here is.
Yes.
And nowadays, sometimes the schools just very much is not that. Like you wish the schools can be more advanced or more giving the kids more kind of tools to be able to
Yeah.
move forward, but you feel their tools a little bit behind.
Yeah. So yes, with regards to responsibility, I think it's so I mean different kids will struggle with different things, right? Time management will be for example one challenge, and yes, they may not be very responsible, but at the end of the day, our job really as parents is to guide them and remind them, but at the end of the day, they have to do it, right? So that is something that we as parents need to accept, that they're going to have to do it themselves and they're going to have to bear the consequences. I can't tell you how many times, even for younger children especially, parents are actually doing homework for their children. they're doing projects for their children, like, and I'm talking about younger children, right? And how is that helping your child, right? That's not helping them at all, right? Maybe they'll get that good grade or whatever, but how is that, so sometimes parents are even enabling that type of behavior, right? So I think it's a valid concern, and I think we can, offer some reminders, some strategies at an appropriate time. But at the end of the day, the child has to figure it out themselves, right? If we don't let them figure it out themselves, they're going to continue depending upon us, and they're not going to learn from their mistakes, right? I've seen, like, okay, so I'll give an example. So I knew someone, and this was someone who was a bit older in university. This individual was busy with stuff. We were taking a class together, and it's busy with extracurricular stuff. And the deadline for the paper has come and gone, and they're losing whatever 5% per day, but they're too busy doing their other stuff, you know, and, and you're gonna look at that, and even myself, I was like, okay, that's pretty delinquent behavior. Okay, today that person is a member of parliament. Okay. So, okay. Okay. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, I thought that behavior was pretty, very responsible, but you know what? They figured their life out. Okay. So sometimes, people learn, they learn over time. They work in different ways. So yes, our job is to be there as a guiding force, encouraging, giving some strategies. But at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in letting kids do it themselves, because at the end of the day, it's their life and they're going to have to deal with it. And I'm not always going to be there watching over them, or I'm not going to be with them all the time. So the more they can do on their own, and personally, I also benefited from that as well, alhamdulillah, because I was living away from home from age 11 to 21 until I came home on the weekends. And sometimes I wonder, of course, I love my mother, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless her, but sometimes I wonder that if I had stayed at home, how would have I turned out, as opposed to gaining that independence and being forced to live alone. It was really hard at first. I cried the first year. The first year that I was away from home, even though I would go home on the weekends, I cried, right? It was hard, but it was good. My parents, that they actually toughed it out, and they knew I was like crying and doing all those things, and even halfway through I had a breakdown. I'm like, I just want to come home. But no, right? They left me there, and that actually, alhamdulillah, it really helped me grow and learn, right, from my mistakes, from being in that situation. So I really believe that we have to be able to be hands off at some point. We need to give them the right direction, give them some encouragement, give them their tools, and then hands off and let them deal with it. Because if they don't, then
Set a good example for them by doing it.
yeah, setting a good example. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's an online comment. What if they do not want to take responsibilities? Say some children and others do not. Okay, so a child does not want to take responsibility. A child does not want to take responsibility. Inshallah, we'll wrap up in the next 5 minutes. So a child does not want to take responsibility. So you want them to take responsibility, and they don't want to do it. So what do you do in that situation, right? I would say that it has, so I mean, I guess it depends on what type of responsibility it is. But at the end of the day, it sort of comes down to, okay, how important is this responsibility? Are we talking about chores? Are we talking about, helping out in different ways? A lot of times, what I would suggest doing and what works better is actually to find out what type of activities a child is interested in. Maybe the responsibility that we're trying to give to the child is not interesting to them, right? They don't really, it doesn't appeal to them. Chores, okay. So yes, children generally, many children may not want to chores, that, and I understand that. But I think, the things that have to do with them, we can leave it to them. Okay, that's what I would advise. So for example, I think it's fair to say that this is the bathroom that you use. Okay, let's say you have multiple bathrooms in your home. This is the bathroom that you use. You're the one who's going to clean it. Okay. And if you don't clean it, you're going to be you're going to be living in a mess, but you're going to have to deal with it because that's your thing. Okay. And just leave them with that, and just see, how far it goes. And maybe it's going to get really bad. Maybe the room's going to be, I don't know, how many times have we seen, mothers getting upset over rooms not being cleaned? Okay. Hey, if your child loves living in a mess, let them live in a mess for a little while. Okay. Like as long as it's within their room and that's their space and they feel comfortable in that mess, you know what? And personally, I don't feel it's worth, going through the pain of shouting and having all these, matches in like this competition in terms of, trying to force them to do something. Now, of course, you don't want them to continue to live like that. So, you want to try to incentivize it, you want to try to reason with them. But is it really worth, losing your peace and your sleep over it? I don't know. The question is, okay, what if it affects their mood? I think, this is the type of situation where we are, as parents, maybe making judgments as to what is affecting the child or what is not, and maybe it is affecting them, right? But at the end of the day, if the child does not want to take responsibility for something that is theirs, and they have poor habits, we are not going to be able to force them to do it. Okay, we're not going to be able to. Let's just set that as a baseline, that we are not going to be able to force our children to do things. So in that situation, I say that, okay, we have to either be at peace with whatever they're doing, or we have to come up with some strategies to try to get them to do it. So maybe it's an incentive, right? Maybe we say, okay, you take away something, say, okay, you have this privilege, you're not going to have it, your data is going to be cut off on your phone until you clean your room, right? As an example, right? Or there's going to be no internet in the house, and everyone's going to suffer until that room gets cleaned, or until this happens or that happens. So you can certainly leverage, the privileges that you're giving to your child for things that you want them to do, but you're not going to be able to, shout with them, or fight with them and get them to do it. That's not going to happen. Okay. Or if you do it, it's going to be, a huge drama. It's going to be a huge scene, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to repeat every time, because that's the sort of standard that has been set, right? So I think, being clear and being firm is good. Yes, you can have some rules, but you need to decide if the rule or the issue is really worth it or not. Again, different parents will have different levels of tolerance, right? For me, if it's not a huge thing, and if it affects only the child and it's not having a major effect on their well-being, so be it, right? I'd rather focus on them being, being positive and focusing on other things. And if they don't care about that much, okay, fine. But if it is a real issue, and that is, you feel that is something that is really important and it is affecting them, then you can leverage the privileges that they have, or the promise of giving more privileges. You can leverage that. Okay, so you wanted to do this X, Y, or Z, or you wanted this freedom or that freedom. Well, if you don't do this, then that's not giving me confidence to give you more of what you want. So you're going to end up losing if you don't end up following. So that's another strategy. So,
But just like, I think this is very important things, don't escalate things when they reach certain age, they can walk away from home. Make sure.
yes, very good point.
Very important, like, staying at home, doing their mistakes, doing what things you probably feel is really wrong, 100% wrong, under your sight, way better than.
Very excellent point. So the brother is saying, for those who are online, that don't lose sight of the big picture. And that is, you would much rather have, to summarize, you would much rather have your child be at home and do the things that you don't like than them leaving home altogether, right? So if it ever comes to that point, it's very interesting, because subhanAllah, sometimes I'm going to wrap up with this. Sometimes I deal with, situations in families where they're really trying to force their child to behave in a certain way. And then it comes to that point where the child is now at risk of leaving and running away from home. And then all of a sudden, everything becomes okay, right? Because that's, what choice do you have at that point, right? So it's a lot better to, keep that big picture in mind and not push your child so much that they're going to be, perhaps led to do something drastic. So yes, have these conversations and all of that, and pick what you want to focus on. At the end of the day, you want to just focus on the things that actually matter, and not be too, focused on the things which don't have any major consequences if they're overlooked. Okay? Because no child is going to be perfect. They're always going to have challenges and issues. So you got to pick your battles and see, okay, which one is actually worth, focusing on, which one is not worth it, perhaps. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. And mashallah, I can see that there is a real interest in, in learning about these things and discussing these things. And I really do think that we all benefit when we do this, because, when I am researching this and thinking about my own experiences, I'm also benefiting, alhamdulillah. And then we share it, and then, we exchange questions and comments and suggestions. Then we all benefit as well. And at the end of the day, my brothers and sisters, know that, you're not alone. And this is one of the reasons we actually started a parenting support group. And I know that we've sort of evolved from that. But we are all in the same boat as parents. And when we share and when we talk, including about our struggles with our children, and it's fine to do that, because nobody has a perfect home and a perfect family, then we all benefit and we get strength from one another, right? So when we look at social media, when you look at people from the outside, it looks like everyone is happy, everyone else is happy, and we're the only ones who have the problems. But the reality is that everyone is struggling in their own way because this life is made up of challenges. And when you do have such a challenge, know that you're not alone, and you can always come, inshallah, and talk to me, or talk to someone that you trust, inshallah, and try to get some support. And at the end of the day, inshallah, the situation will pass sooner or later, as long as you've done your homework when the children were young, and you've given them love and attention and a good tarbiyah, and you've nurtured them well. They will go through some turbulence during their teenage years, but inshallah, and this is not me saying it, this was a youth worker I heard on the radio many, many years ago on CBC, saying that the parents, the children, he said every child will go through, and I don't want to keep talking, but he said every child will go through turbulence. It's the children who have a foundation, who are being given a foundation. When they snap out of it, they'll have something to fall back on. It's the children who don't have a foundation, whose parents have not made the effort when they were younger, who will have nowhere to go once they snap out of it, and they will not snap out of it, perhaps. Okay, so your child, inshallah, will snap out of it at some point. Rest assured, whatever you're experiencing, inshallah, will be temporary as long as you've done your work. Do not give up hope. Continue to love them. Continue to leave the channels of communication open. Try to be a positive influence in their life, inshallah, and make lots of dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children and guide us to be the best parents and guide them to be the best children and the best teens and the best human beings as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. Thank you everyone. جزاك الله خير who joined in person and online as well. بارك الله فيكم.